work like decades, well, not that many, but 2 decades in the making. And to open it up a little bit, because I know we only have an hour and I'd love to have some discussion afterward. But the idea of thinking of seed as architecture is coming through a very deep, obsessive ADHD, also probably autistic thinking and obsessing about seeds for the last 20 years in all the ways that they are. And I started a PhD, which I then decided, I mean, for administrative reasons, I could not submit. But it helped me to put these thoughts into words. And so seedless architecture, this is part of that thing. So there's many things and ways to think about food, but architecture is one of them. And I'm going to show you a very cute picture of a 22-year-old Zayaan. But to give you just a bit of a background, which I need my notes for, we never grew up with a garden. My mother was like scared of insects, basically. That's what she says. That's why we weren't allowed plants in the house. But I was so called to study and learn about them that I went to do landscape design at Seed Biblioteek in 2000, and I think it was 4 or 5, and horticulture after that. And so I kind of really immersed myself in all of that kind of thinking and learning. And then, of course, that means slowly bringing plants into the house. And now I love to say that my parents are growing lots and lots of plants in their brick garden because it's all in pots. But that mind, the change of mind happened. She was able to open up a little bit and accept that insects are part of life. I was also very interested in food cultivation and just food as a general way of being and knowing, as well as urban agriculture. So my work is very centered in Cape Town. And so for my horticulture research project, I looked at green roof systems as potential sites for food growing and as well as biodiversity belts throughout the city because of as a result of the spatial limitations of the city of Cape Town, having no cultivatable land, so they say, and also thinking with the urban agriculture policy of 2007, which is now, I mean, the policy still exists, but the office is defunct. And I just was thinking like a bird and scanning the city and noticing that there were so many open spaces on the rooftops. It was a bit wild to talk about green roofs in the early 2000s because people thought you were crazy. How are you going to grow plants on the roof? And now it's a thing, which is wonderful to see. And so I tried to make it work as a 20-something, but I could not do it. And so I went to go work as a nursery manager for the Ovenstones, who have Stellenberg Estates in Kenilworth. It's one of the old Kenilworth estates, but they kind of keep it very much colonial chic. I don't know how you say that, but very, kind of love for the English perennial gardens, magnificent grounds. And so one of my main roles was seed production, because a lot of those English perennial plants need you to sow them every year. And this is like literally where my mind blew wide open, because I learned about heirloom seed, heritage seed, and that you could get such things as black and white tomatoes, or like massive double peoniform poppies. Yeah, and just the fact, started thinking or seeding the idea that heritage food and indigenous food is something that at that stage we were never considering. And so all of those ideas kind of were seeded around that time. And right after that, I was there for 4 years. And right after that, I got hired by Surplus People's Project, which is a land reform organization based in Salt River, but they work up and down West Coast, all the way to the Friends, beyond Springbok. And I got a very fast lesson around what the colonial project and forced removals did to people's livelihoods, but also culturally, and thinking in terms of how being severed from land means that your very the epistemologies and the cosmologies that build us also begin to be severed, because people don't grow up growing seed, for example. Seed is a pivotal lens to look at that. And so thinking through forced removals also became a foundational aspect of the work that I do. And learning pretty much that, even in the last 30 years of democracy, nothing's really changed. The percentage of land ownership still the same. And so when I was at SPP, my work was around the technical support for farmers, as well as seed sovereignty work and agroecology. And we started a kind of network for just me and a group of friends, understanding that, still today probably it's the same, but that as young people, the biggest threat we have is unemployment, amongst other things. And so we started a network of people in food. All of us were artists, but all of us loved food. Some of us were farmers, some of us were producers, some of us were chefs, cooks, and really researchers, and really thinking about our food system, but from a cultural perspective. And one of our group of friends, they were based at, their project was called Tisa Nabanya, and they were based at the F81 farm, Andres farm in Tamburskloof, which is contested land, it's military land. Obviously, the military don't really have land. So it's been occupied for over 40 years, it's probably over 50 years now. People have been born there for generations. There's lots of animals there, lots of production. It's a big piece of land. And there were these constant kind of threats from the Department of Public Works to forcibly remove everyone. And so, and many, this is a legal situation that's been going on for decades. And so they decided we are going to have a protest of markets. And so we said, okay, yes, we can support by having a seed swap. And so we can do a table, a seed swap table. This is seed queens of the city. This is Tanya on the right, and this is Tuma on the left. Tuma is was one of the founding members of Tisa Nabanya. So both seed people. There was a lot of joy, a lot of laughter, and we were set up between the flower seller and the vintage stores, and people came from all over the district. People we didn't even know. We sent up one Facebook event, and everybody donated seed, all kinds of seed, and they were all like heirloom, heritage, organic. There were no big agriculture, let's say, or kind of toxic, what we call like corporate toxic seed that you have to wash because it's full of fungicide and so on. And we're not specific when we asked again, also now, but when we asked for donations, we just said, bring your seeds. We'll have seed in your seeds. And so it was very interesting because people came with very beautifully artistically made envelopes for this seed. And someone even donated, I've told the story so many times, but it's amazing. Someone even donated seeds. I think they were Kierborn seeds, but they were 40 years old. And we're like, what are you doing this? It's so obvious that these people have come from all over, all kinds of people who all grow seed. So seed is obviously a very kind of amenable, even democratic space. It's for everyone. It's an equalizer. And people hold on to it with such care. And you could see that people were thinking, finally, a place I can give my seed. Because for 40 years, taking care of the seed themselves. And so, for example, with that 40-year-old seed, we turned it into an instrument because we can't grow it. And so thus was born a Seed Biblioteek, where we are really concerned. We are really aware of the fact that the power of seed is as a connector, and definitely towards sharing our stories and telling our stories, even if we've forgotten. And over the years, with the help of trying to write this dissertation, it's been very a wonderful place to think through all of these ideas, of which there are many. One of them that's very important is the idea of a library and not a bank. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read an extract of the dissertation. But a common solution for saving seeds from extinction has been the seed or gene bank. Yet this too has been highly criticized over the years, as seed banking creates exclusive spaces, often untouchable by those who have fostered the same seed for millennia. Seed banks by nature are spaces where research facilities for plant genetics support production. And as author John Seabrook says in one of his articles, most seed banks were created as short-term storage facilities in order to develop new seeds, something like genetic libraries. In the past 30 years, they have been modified to include long-term storage facilities which preserve varieties that are no longer grown in fields. They're more like museums or zoos. Many gene banks are not adequately equipped or funded for long-term storage. He shares again, as one scientist told me, we call them seed banks, but actually they're more like molds. A common criticism of these gene banks is the stillness that adaptation and custodianship face in these environments. Kerry Fowler's novel Seeds on Ice shares his story of the journey towards realizing the Svalbard Seed Vault, which is the big seed bank for the world in Norway. The reviews of the book, and by default of the Seed Vault itself, include such lauds as the most crucial agrarian library, our most precious culinary resource, and the great comfort that knowing all about this project provides for those of us struggling to keep the planet from cracking. A collection as large and diverse as this Seed Vault holds is impressive, yet even a well-run bank isn't an ironclad guarantee against extinction. The fundamental idea is for seeds to be saved from certain apocalypse and the need to save humanity from starvation. Seed banks and gene banks have risen as an insurance for the commons, but perhaps have gotten stuck in a capitalistic paradigm. Virginia D. Nazarea warns against this in her book, Heirloom Seeds and Their Keepers, Marginality and Memory in the Conservation of Biologic Diversity. Learn the lessons we must as we wean ourselves from the historically colonial appropriation of plant genetic resources in botanical gardens and gene banks to a more enlightened position of facilitating conservation in situ and in partnership with small-scale farmers and old-timey gardeners. So, in the same way that banks may sell solutions to poverty, seed banks follow the similar process, focusing on time-stilled storage dependent on capital, which contrasts with fluid community. Seed libraries where access remains open. Seeds offer plants opportunity to remain in the jurisdiction of gardeners and farmers, able to freely adapt to changing environmental conditions. As an example, the ancestor of maize that we know and love, called teosinte, is still grown alongside many maize fields in Central America to avoid it being frozen in its further marginalization. So a lot of the corporatization of seed follows, and which follows this kind of legal jurisdiction around the governance of that seed, around patenting, breeding, but it does not take into account any of the fact that these seeds come from somewhere and that generations of farmers have been taking these seeds from their wild ancestry into something that we know and love, that we use to feed our babies, to feed ourselves, that we enjoy recipes from. And of course, there are many other kinds of ways to use seed, like the cotton in our jeans, or using it to make jewelry. All of these ways that our human cultural practices are entangled in are an important aspect. And why we are so horrified about it being a library as opposed to a bank is because a library is for the community. A library is open access. Maybe you pay a membership, which we don't, but the point is it's what do you call it when it's just a gesture? It's gestural, right? And you get access to all these DVDs and books and CDs and community space to have meetings and photocopies and people and variants who will support you and help. As opposed to a bank, which is very much about the individual and very much about gains. You don't use a bank for free. And it is about the hoarding of wealth for certain disaster, where a library is not, the library understands that books go missing and that people will damage books, and so seeds in the same way, we think about them as we think about books. So our main, this is George, by the way, doesn't know that I've put this for all these people to see. I'm going to go buy him lunch, let him know. But George is the kind of, if I can say, custodian of Bertha House. So you will run into him if you go to Bertha House. And Bertha House is the kind of activist space offices in Mowbray. It's in the old, what is that hotel? It's not Victorian Hotel. The yellow one that is very close to, someone help me answer because my brain is all of a sudden become fried. It's a big yellow building, somewhere near where the shopper used to be, a couple blocks away. It's very close to here. They close on weekends unless there's an event, in which case you can attend if you just want to go. But you basically can just grab the key at reception. You need to log in what you are donating in order to take seeds out. Even if you're donating soil, even if you're donating time, you can't just take, because then there's nothing left. But we do have librarians there, and I don't have photographs of my librarians. That's why I didn't include it. That's not going to be. But we have librarians who are there from Tuesdays 10 to 3.
Royal Standard.
Thank you, the Royal Standard Hotel. They've done an interesting take on, but if you have an architecturally also in the grounds itself, if you haven't been there, I kind of suggest you go. We had Frida join us in July, and I like to say that Frida, it was like she opened the curtains of the bibliotheque and let the lights in and dusted the cobwebs out the corners. She came with all this energy and ideas, and that's really where we're like, oh yes, let's do this and take this on and actually formalize it. And one of the wonderful things that Frida has done is to do a seed of the week. And so you'll see each week there's a new seed that we celebrate, and it goes a little bit of a so basically this bibliotheque is in a glass house that's underneath the stairs of Bertha House. It used to be, I think it was just the interior designer who needed a solution for this weird under the stairs kind of space. So they put a glass house in for growing plants, and then no one actually took care of it, they all died. And so we just moved in, they wanted a seed library. And so on the side of it, there's a little shop that is popped up with some of the books. And then last week, Friday, we launched, it's very dark, but we launched the Seed Biblioteek of the Commons in Muizenberg. It's at Surface Corner, it's above Hanson Lloyd. So the last building before you get the railway. And there's 2 entrances, and the one entrance that's next to the studio, there's a very bright blue door. We are right in the alcove. That's how it looks now. We're going to jazz it up a bit more. But the same idea. On this side of on the wall here is a little cassie that people can donate that we can then catalog and put it in envelopes and distribute so they can go into the walls. But anyone can access it. And we, in our fundraiser, we're able to raise funds so we can also populate it with books and things that people can learn. And then to think a little bit about the architecture of seed itself, which is a whole other part of the thing. I use Strelitzia as this is a seed pod of Strelitzia. Now, you know the crane flower, it's like that. And they develop these beautiful seeds, or these seed pods that are very, very hardwood. And there's a lot of these seed pods inside. So this is from Strelitzia nicolai, the tree. And I'm using this as an example to think about the way that seeds through flowers and the way that flowers, when they get pollinated, they develop seed. But there's a very beautiful architecture in their solutions, their evolutionary solutions, and how they organize themselves, and how often that plant material becomes so unified. This Strelitzia seed pod, I mean, you could like cut something with it. It's really, really hard. So in terms of materiality, so I'm going to This image, the image with the black, the single, ooh, this one here with the matchstick, I'm going to read an excerpt of an email that we sent. It was part of an exhibition that myself and Amy Watson from Space quickly did. And we had to send them overseas. And so it was thinking about the ethics around customs and the ethics of sharing seed. Okay, so we sent along some text and images in case the seeds were seized at customs, which with the Strelitzia, they almost were, but customs elected to pass them through in the end. The text we sent was a juxtaposition of the naturalist botanical voice, which we gleaned from established texts alongside my interpretations and storying of stories we may no longer hear. So really making a commentary about where these kind of botanical knowledge systems come from and whose voice are we reading when we read about, if we want to learn about plants, who creates that botanical / scientific language. Okay. Strelitzia has a grand family. The flower of Strelitzia uncea and Strelitzia reginae, famed for the bird of paradise flower that has been in cultivation for hundreds of years. The stark orange and blue hybridized over and over again. So the seed itself is a blue, which doesn't really pick up here. It looks black. And then the arils are the pink, are the orange floofs that you see. The lesser famed Strelitzia nicolai flowers are far less captivating when viewed from afar, but really because of the darker colors and often because they sit out of human eyeline, because they're up in the trees. Up close, they are magnificent. Dark blue bracts from the head of the crane and white sepals form a crown. There is something peculiar about this plant. It holds secrets unlike the other species. One is the time it takes to mature to be able to access the bright seeds inside. The soft succulent flowers hide wooden seed pods that require hardy tools to pry open, as our fingers are too soft and too weak. That is, if we wish to gather seeds soft enough to eat without compromising the glorious architecture of the seed pod. The perfect tool for this job are pointed beaks or bodies small enough or soft enough to enter into the seed chambers. The soft flower bodies ooze a resin that hardens into a glistening glue, champagne in color at times. It is also the softness that carries a warning for the squeamish. A wrongly placed finger will stab a soft part and release many insects if they've chosen to move in, and is reminiscent of stabbing a slug with a blunt appendage. Even more peculiar about this plant is the kind of knowledge that only evolution can hold, that somehow leaks into what we consider to be taxonomical hierarchies. The brightly colored orange arils contain bilirubin, a pigment compound that is mistakenly considered to be strictly animal chemical, associated with the breaking down of heme, the pigment that changes our bruises from a red color through the spectrums of purples, browns, and eventually fading to be orange and yellow. This yellow also reminiscent of the jaundiced coloration of newborns whose skin and eyes have bilirubin in excess. The so-called scientific discovery of bilirubin in Strelitzia nicolai has influenced scientists to perhaps think about this potentially toxic compound as a healing one instead. Again, a soft secret the plant may hold in influencing schools of thought, perhaps reminding us that certain elements we live with are older than we can even imagine, older than us, older than plants. We sowed the Strelitzia seeds by the arils into a kind of a text to make a poem, like a not really a beautiful poem, but and it did get some customs with the essence. So also thinking about, oh, I forgot to say, and then there's more on this topic if you're interested. If you go listen on Mixcloud, you Seeds from the Streets. And then thinking again in terms of kind of strict architecture. I think it was 2017. I went with the Seed and Knowledge Initiative to Zimbabwe to look at. Already there was a festival and we were thinking and having a regional meeting, about the Rapoko Revival Project, which is the finger millets. And so it's really looking at how in Southern Africa, but Africa as a whole, and maybe the world, maize has taken over as the staple grain, where it's not from here. So how did that happen? And it's, maize is very expensive to grow. It takes a lot of water. It needs a lot of fertilizer or like fertility. It's very, it's kind of like a newborn baby. Where Rakoko, the finger millet, and grains like sorghum are much hardier. Don't have to worry about them. They get irrigated from rain. They're much easier to process, much easier to harvest. So this is Mr. and Mrs. Changuru, and they are at that stage, and I'm sure they still are, involved in this kind of reproduction project, and this is their granary. And so one of the biggest issues that people in this area face with the storage of Rakoko is the infestation of weevils and rodents. And so they put their granary up higher so that they don't climb up. And then they've got, so there's what do you call it? It's like a overhang. So you can't just climb up. You need to be able to scale it slightly. And then on the inside, the partitions are such that you can work your way through the different cubicles. And it is said that they told me that in this way they can save Rakoko for up to 100 years. Just to think about your food security and regeneration. And then on the contrast of that, thinking about granaries, thinking about grains, thinking about the learning project and how to think about these things. I couldn't find anything. So in my dissertation draft, it's like blank. It's like a Caesar that used to work for the marker, Zayaan Khan in the water plants, was telling me that, so with Heatherwick Studios, they converted the old silo into this museum and also hotel. And they did a remarkable job. It wasn't an easy feat to kind of rethink the space. But that they cut an image of a grain into the design, but it's not written anywhere, and no one really speaks about it, but the staff know about it. So it's very hard to find where it is, but you can definitely see, this to me looks like a wheat cut. Or if you look at maize from the side, then maize from the side. So I thought that was a little exciting. And something to think about in the contrast of storing grain in the traditional methodology than it is now. How are we for time, by the way? Okay, because I have more to say about architecture, see, and I'm very cheeky because my team has told me that I need to start until we formalize, and you always tell people because they always want to know how to donate to the Seed Biblioteek. So until we become an organization, everything unfortunately has to go through my name. But thank you very much for this talk, and it would be lovely to have a discussion on ask questions or any other kind of issue. Thanks, guys. Architecture stuff, but is there nothing online? Anything else? I know a lot about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I think it's very helpful to just see something that we think we know quite well, but see what size to it. So it's very helpful thinking that. I wanted to ask, was you position yourself in the work not quite counter to, but in some ways counter to the more formal structures like the seed banks and all that kind of thing. Have you received any sort of feedback from those formal institutions, spaces, and so on, and be interested in critique, or is it responsible to deal with seeds like this? Because I would imagine they've got all the protocols about things, and what's that relationship like?
It's very well learned. When I was working with SPP, I was doing, so in 2012, we learned about the changes in seed laws that government was really trying to ratify within South Africa, which ultimately what these seed laws do kind of deems one kind of seed and thus their seed users as more important as other kinds of seed. And it was very stark because what it did was it said that these varieties that government can see, which were these corporate varieties, hybrids, very kind of high hybrids, ultra hybrids, and seeds, for example, like genetic modified seeds. But these patented seeds, there was a kind of a track record of, right? They could hold space. But for the traditional seeds that were in the comments, they'd say, they couldn't see them. So it's the same thing like if your children are not in like an ECD program, government cannot see them. And so it's very difficult for them to get access to all the important things that they need access. But what it meant was that the people who are fostering and working with the unseen seed could potentially be criminalized for using those. And so there was a lot of discussion and lobbying and question asking with governments, like from 2012 until continuously, there were still hearings and so on. So they're very aware of the work that we are doing. And I went to visit. So South Africa has a national seed bank called the National Plant Genetic Resource Center, the NPGRC, and they speak in the economic development community, SADC community, and our mother bank, let's say, so this gene bank has to send half its genetic material to the mother bank that's in Lusaka. And that bank in Lusaka then sends half of their entire accessions, all their collection, to the Svalbard seed bank vault. So we have a direct access. And I say direct, but it's really inaccessible. It's not an easy process. They've only ever had one, people take out once through the Lebanese Syrian wheat breeding programs. And so we're also very aware to say that, okay, if there's this othering of traditional ancient heirloom heritage seed, and it's like this across the continent, at least around the world as well, but we focus in here. And there's this kind of binary of corporations and governments and then smallholder farmers. But we kind of position ourselves to say, but there are other people. There are millions, if not billions, of other people between these two spaces that are not smallholder farmers and are not part of these corporations or governments that love seed. So where are those people? What are they growing? Where are they getting the seed from? And we started this research through SPP to find out which seeds the farmers were working with. And what we found was that seed culture is not something that is intrinsic. It is something you have to learn and keep up. It's a lot of work. It can be expensive in terms of time and so on. But people who were not so, who were closer to telecommunications, who were closer to main roads and main cities, didn't really have their seed culture preserved anymore. Often these were people that were forcibly. People who were more in villages and were more removed from these main spaces still had their seed intact. And so there were a lot of these varieties that we could see. Absolutely no one had heard about the seed laws, so that which was obvious, we knew that, but it was nice to have that paper. And so it's not to say that we are against that system. Those systems are important, but what is on the outside of those systems is not just disappearing because of urbanization and contemporary life, but it's also in a lot of ways attacked. And so that has to stop. And the revival, in some cases, the retrieval of that knowledge becomes a very important way to bring back a lot of the stuff from extinction, and to make it like sexy and fun and cool and interesting, because it's so interesting, it's so layered story. So it's about having kind of an overarching knowledge of all of it, and then positioning oneself wherever you feel safe to do so in this realm, because you can make a lot of money as a breeder. It's a lot of work, but you very wealthy very quickly, like a lot of people who are doing flower production or fynbos. That's a huge industry for patents. But politically, it's obvious where we are. But we won't not accept that seed if you give us space. There's a space for all of it somehow. We'd like to make it smaller, but as it stands, we're working in capacity. Does that answer your question?
More questions in the room, please.
I'll say a handful of something I'm going to share. And it's just a reason life. And when I was actually some problems bank and I couldn't see. That's the curious markets on the side next week. It's actually out of that. It's now it's more of like official projects. It's not only as you can imagine. So I was thinking is and how does that as you said, such as the library, popular by Islamic to the space, also the secondary students within the government. Say the think banks also looking at this spatial guidance students to conceptualize the other to a space such as something like should I think of this in the context of maybe like thinking of what is library in the sense of this function, after the context of libraries more the sharing knowledge is really more in a sense of the course of different practices that we call it the rituals, the practice, maybe sharing is also the aspiration of knowledge to the and how does that in fits in the how we can design for future syntax instead of how then they don't know sense of fundamental open space in the sense of thinking for such as the famous one, which is alive in the parish. What includes so
then seed balls in Sara in the mountain.
it's a little bit of nowhere, but you can't actually interact with what's there, but as you said, that it's the government's information. Where you treat with this as much as the
So the
how to design the sense of
yeah, I can help you with that because on the one hand, so the idea of a seed bank is more, it's like if we think about it, it's like they think about it as doomsday, it's an apocalyptic thing, that one day the end of the world is going to come, and then it's going to destroy everything and won't have any seeds, but at least we have this fault in the mountain that is very impenetrable, and we need certain ways to get above that, which is important. I'm not denying that, but it's inaccessible is the point. And growing up in South Africa as a South African, you learn about access very young, and it's how important it is to be practicing it. But what they've done, because they've had a lot of criticism, is that people have tried to take out, like let's say I donate seed to the NPOC, my village is flooded, for example. This hasn't happened, but I'm just giving an example. And I want to take seed out, and they don't have any more. It's all in Svalbard. It's like impossible. Unless you're working with big research entities that can then access it. So one of the things they've done is they've started, and I'm not sure if it's the organization itself or if it's these other organizations that work with, but they've started these like artistic residencies where you can go, I don't know if it's a month, 2 months, twice a year to the Svalbard Seed Bank and make art. Not from the seed, but from whatever you are gleaning from experiencing. So that, in a way, helps to create this kind of archive of artistic cultural practice, often around thinking through environmental crisis in situ. So they'll do it in the freezing cold or in the summertime, which is still very cold. But there are those kind of ways of thinking about it. So it's a tiny start, but they're doing something like that. If you look at the seed bank that's in, I'm going to call it River Plant. I can't remember which river what it is in Gauteng. The one that's the government one in Jersey. They do not want to do that because they have very strict protocols. Unfortunately, also it's on a floodplain and it's below the water level. So, and it has happened where a flood has come in, but should it just by now. But so the difference also between a library and a bank is that the bank is thinking long-term storage. The library is thinking short. So the library has the seeds and envelopes in a cool, dark place. A bank keeps everything in freezers. So they dry the seed and they take it, it's called desiccation. They take it down so that it only contains one molecule of water, so that it doesn't die. So it freezes for a time, so that when you thaw it again, you can sow the seed. But if you keep seed not frozen for the same period of time, you're going to get beetles come in, it's going to get moldy, whatever. You're much more open to testing against one. And so their protocols are very specific. They've got high security. They're not trying to invite people in. They can send you seed, but they're not really wanting to have this. Whereas the library, I think, as a space, it's an important place to stay. We're losing our place. So we're losing our rhythms and our rituals around seed, because seed doesn't come alone. Seed comes with its, on shoulders of giants. There's a lot of ritual, a lot of poetry, and song and art and cultural stuff around seed because of that very intimate relationship with people. So I don't know what the in-between looks like. It would be a seed library maybe that also has reasons, not sure. But it's servicing two different needs. That makes sense. And I'm happy to send you something about it. People have written about it also. But it's slightly not the same.
Can I do one of our questions? This is from Nadia. She says, thank you for a fresh way of thinking about seeds. I imagine that the idea of a seed library could be a great initiative in schools to coexist with the free gardening initiatives that have been found to be very successful as a way to access rural families. It could also be great as an initiative at botanical gardens as we approach any other places to buy biomes.
No, because we're so small. But the idea with formalizing is that we can do that because we know that these places are needed. I have done quite a lot of work around seed literacy. Where do I look to talk to Nadia? Where's it from? But tried a lot of work around seed literacy, which is working with children to think about seeds. So whether it's the difference between a raw and a cooked seed, whether it's the way seeds are all different colors and shapes and feelings and textures, making art with seeds, and then growing the seed, obviously. But that takes we will happily send seed. While I have financial means, I'm also happy to do it out of pocket. It cost me like $60, put it anywhere in the country. But the idea of formalizing means that we can get access to be doing this every day of the week and not just when the need arises or an event or once a week with different places. But also go through existing government libraries and community libraries and school libraries where we know there are people who are taking care so that the whole library doesn't get stolen, for example, or harassed by squirrels. So it's definitely on the cards, and that's why I say, I should have probably left the QR code up, but it's so ugly. But that's why it's so important that these, that we can kind of get support for people to focus on this, because any seed, absolutely, in all the years of doing this, you have a seed talk, you have a seed event, people come with their seed. in all the fundraisers and other stuff I've done in my life, nothing is like seed is really for everyone. Yeah.
It's so beautiful that we have connections. We visited their friend of mine, so it was how she opened the first. She literally she's gone with lights of my life. Yeah. So it's actually gone for it's like she did a lovely thing, I don't know about it, but for her birthday they see bombs and they thought she's got people to create a map. A little map, what day they placed the C bomb, where they placed it. And it's inspired me with myself just thinking about the scalability of these bombs, this kind of approaches aspects of news, disruptive, and what are the implications for spatial design when you start dropping these, and then also the human part of making the bomb and coming together. So I was just wanting to know if you have an interesting story or an interesting thought on that in landscape design, if you
So there's a lot of kind of protest actually things, especially these ones. And this kind of going on thinking around which hits South Africa pretty hard in the British Empire. But one of the things that we did, which I also have, I can tell you about but one of the things back in the days, I was like, no, we can't hold in bombs, we have to hold in bowls. But actually, you have to hold in bowls. You have to be specific in what you're doing, why. Because it is, and it comes from the guerrilla garden in movement, where they would take these, like, why are there these plants, like the oleanders that are growing up and down our highways? Why are they still here? There are other plants that could serve perfectly well, exactly the same. That didn't need to be such plants that are so celebrated. That take a lot of maintenance. But something interesting about those specific rules is that I did, so one of the other options, if no one had any questions, I was going to talk about clay. That's the clay that she made of the yeah, so I had this project around thinking about clay, but the clay specifically from sites of Fort Street. So it started in District 6, but then I started getting access to clay from around District through different construction sites and maintenance sites, city maintenance sites. And so I got a lot of clay, and I've been researching for about 5 years. Also very deep as I do. And she did, she wanted to give, it has to think of things, but research kind of spiritual and political way of thinking about clay that doesn't have to be ceramic, clay that goes back to the land, because it holds very beautifully onto water. So when it is the season, if you throw it somewhere that gets water, it'll help. It's like a perfect nursery or an incubator for the seeds. Even themselves are already things. The other thing I wanted to say, oh no, I forgot. Seed bombs. It's gone. I dropped mine with my seeds here. Oh no, yeah. So oh,
Another, I think, I don't know if it's 2 questions from the same person online on the Strad. In my own concept design for a Cape Town green room, assuming it's a student, exploring how planting palettes can carry cultural narratives. How might the green roof function as a kind of seed biblioteek, one of indigenous seed or cultivation strategies do you think are most resilient for rooftop conditions? And how could designers like me protect those genetics while keeping them publicly accessible? There's a part 2. And you use art to tell food stories, and designing a green roof is more than a private space. What practices of seed exchange, workshops, or seasonal rituals would you recommend to ensure that local residents feel a sense of ownership and ongoing stewardship?
Also email me that and send you stuff. Do they have, well, that's my Instagram, if it's easier, but I didn't put my email address out.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, yes, please, yeah. You've got it. Yeah.
Hello.
Ooh, ooh.
Sorry, yeah, I'm the person who asked the question. Sorry to
Hi.
interrupt.
No, no, go.
Um, my name is Shima, and I'm a final year landscape architecture student at CBUT. In addition to the two questions, one more I have, which is more personal, is regarding your career. I wanted to ask, in your work reclaiming indigenous food systems and advocating for seed sovereignty, what have been some of the most significant challenges or pushbacks you've encountered? And in contrast, which moments or outcomes have felt more fulfilling or affirmed the value of this path for you? Thank you.
So the hardest, okay?
The whole is always.
Yeah. The brief, I'll start at the end. The hardest part of, especially with indigenous food reclamation and revival, is racism. By far, it killed it in me, and I burnt out trying to fight the whole time. And coming against these white walls, until the point that I burnt out entirely and I dropped down into the deepest, darkest depression. And I can speak freely about it because I actually wrote about it. I got paid to write about it, which is cool. So I feel like I feel from it enough, but in which I was willing to give everything up and just like go work for acres or something, which I'm very glad I didn't. And then decided that my energy and capacity was not for fighting to make this a valid space, and so that my recipes and ideas and ways of working would just get stolen basically and appropriated. I would look to put my energy elsewhere. So that's what I decided to do. And Seed is an easy place. Only now since Frida, honestly, it's been like, oh, I can just do everything through the Seed book, including indigenous food, including recipes. Also because there's a team and it's much more accessible to do it that way. But the determination and the proof that I have is like, sometimes, for example, I'll have dreams about, like, we stuck with the recipe and then about how to do it. So I believe my ancestors and kind of everything. And gleaning information that way. And I mean, I have this example with food plants, and not just for food, for other uses, also like cleaning teeth and stuff, and especially caring for babies, like babies. But also in doing workshops and events and so on, which I've been doing for a long time, I'll often have people come back and say to me, oh my gosh, this time that I asked you this question 15 years ago, it changed the trajectory of what I was doing and now I'm doing this, or it found a solution here and then this happened. So I can kind of easily triangulate that way. But getting to green roofs, if you can go to Shima, go to, if you haven't been, to the roof at Bertha House in Mowbray. It's not, so you get two different kinds of green roofs, and this one is not an extensive one. It's like pots on a roof. And my research was more like turning the roof into a garden. But the idea is that we then start cultivating things on the roof. It's a great idea, but I really love the fact that soil is a body and that soil can speak through mycelia and nutritivores and stuff like this and water. And so I'm kind of the impression that because in a city like Cape Town that has a hard southeaster, a very dry summer, pallets tend to dry up quickly. So unless you have access to water, that's going to be a problem. And so it makes more sense to kind of have bigger pots. So there's those kinds of things to think about. But then you have events, you have seed swaps, you have recipes, you have drawing recipes, you have making seed bombs, you have propagation techniques. There are many different ways of learning and things you can do. And I'm happy to send some ideas to ensure that people feel agency in their roof on their building. There was one more thing I wanted to say about it. What was the first part of the question?
Cultivation strategy.
So that was on the cultivation, was that you have to think about the environment, the wind, and how sometimes seeds can just blow away if you haven't set it up right. But there are different ways to do it. And so using things like clay, as long as they're wet, integrates into your soil mixture, ensures that they stay heavier, because that's what you want. And that they don't dry out too quickly. You want some mulch that's also heavy. But if you're doing it through pallets, then could even kind of sow heavy and around so that it becomes this kind of blanket that things can't blow away. And then you definitely want to grow them in pots. Like don't just sow seed if you can, so that they have a stronger chance of survival, so their roots are stronger and bigger. Yeah. You want to set the seed in pots and then transplant the seedlings. And you'll only figure it out as you go, you know, because you'll fail sometimes and then you'll succeed in other ways. Like I've been trying to grow these poppies, and for the last 2 years, the snails just annihilate them overnight. And they're all dead. And so now I'm doing this like intensive snail harvesting. So they don't. Are there any other questions online? So there's a roof garden at Bertha House. And it might work if you go, Shiva, if you could hear me, if you go to Bertha House on a particular day and I can try to meet you there, that might be easy. We can have a coffee. That might be easy, Shima. But let me know because I live on the other side of town.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.